less resistance if I take the 3/8 one rather than the 1/2 inch one. So I'll take the corners off. There was a time when I would have cut those round on a bandsaw, but I decided that lathes were better to make things round than bandsaws on that side. So the reason I use this, it isn't so relevant on this particular shape a lot of the bowls that you see on the side here are nearly all made out of exotics and so forth, and a lot of the exotics are brittle or oily on the bottom. What I want to do is I don't want to waste wood, and I want to have total access to the shapes that I'm creating. So these have all been glue blocked. All of those holes on the side have been on glue blocks, just as I'm doing here. I'm not doing anything different. What it means is you can get in at the back of the chuck or without the metal of the chuck dictating the shape of the bowl. Because I've seen too many pieces that I know the design was dictated by the chuck that the people had. So I just want freedom of shape, if you will. Okay. Now the chuck that I've got on the other side there, I need to put the tenon on here. I'll set that up at about 2 5/16 or so. Left leg of the dividers in, mark that out. Okay. We've now got a dimension in there. The parting tool here will just take a tenon. This tenon will be 2.45 diameter, and it will be about 1/4 inch long. The jaws in this chuck have what I would describe as a dog tooth jaw. Instead of having the serrations on it or dovetail, it's parallel with a little tooth that locks in there, and it will just crush the fibres. And I find that grips better than the dovetails and the serrated jaws, to be perfectly honest. So that's my preferred gripping method. Now, we'll see if this comes off that screw chuck or whether the whole, oh it does. So it's come off dead easy. Sometimes they lock on there. I have got a what do you call it, strap wrench with me. Because often those things can grip, and that's the thing you get them off with. That stops the wrestling match. You can just wrap that around your glue block and pull it off. So those things are useful to have. Exercise as if this was a moist bowl, i.e. pretty wet, or a lot of moisture within it. And then I'm going to rough this out and like to a 3/4 inch wall thickness, and then I'll finish the whole thing up. I just want to go through the procedure of what I do constantly to turn bowls which are wet wood. When I go back from here, I suspect they might be delivered on my drive when I get back. My timber merchant was having 2 ash logs cut for me while I'm over here. All my salad bowls are made from ash, and it's an olive ash, and it's certainly nowhere near as hard as the ash that you have here. It's very mellow in its workability. Normally I want the large trees. I don't really like buying a log smaller than 3 feet diameter, to be perfectly honest. But I'm finding I'm having to do that because I can't get those big logs consistently. I was always buying 3 and 4 feet diameter logs. And rather than being what I would call forest grown, they are estate grown or hedgerow grown, which means that the branches break much lower down and the girth of the tree is spread, but the wood is much mellower. It isn't quite being drawn to the light in a forest situation. And that's the type of log that I prefer to buy, but they're becoming more and more difficult to obtain on that big size factor. So I'm having to buy smaller diameter, and the logs that I've now got being cut at the moment, one is 3 feet diameter, the other one is about 26 inch diameter. And I don't like going that small, but I've had to do it, sort of thing. They're about 10 or 12 feet long, both of those logs are. I haven't seen him, but I trust him that much because he knows what I do. And last year I bought 5 of them, so he knows what I'm looking for. So they get milled into 4 inch and 6 inch thick for the salad bowls that they do. When they come in, I rough them out, and this is what I'm going through here in a sense, except that I don't put them on glue blocks. They're done on expanded dovetails or contracted tenons, depending on what shape of bowl I'm doing. So those pieces will come in, and I'll just make this comment to you. The salad bowl market that I deal in is the high end of it. It's normally at the top end kitchen shop area. I don't do them cheaply, I can assure you. Although having dealt with Sonoma, I feel they were cheap, but that's another story. Anyway, those bowls I make pretty efficiently, and I rough these things out, and I let them dry naturally. I don't have kiln drying facility and so forth, as some people do to kilns. And I leave them for about 10 to 12 weeks as a rule to dry out for the air drying pieces. And they're down around the 10% factor by that time in my workshop and so forth. But they're stickered out and the air gets all through them and so on. And I get very little crack on there. They might distort, but they certainly don't check up. And then I finish them off. But I like just relating to, if you think of a 10-inch diameter bowl, 4 inches thick for the domestic utilitarian market, that had better be 40 minutes of work. And I'm talking from the log to the end product. That's what I'm talking about. The actual preparation, i.e. when those logs come in to me, they've been milled at the band mill. They come in and I chainsaw them across into sizes that I can handle, put them on the bandsaw, cut them into this, put them on the lathe, rough out the outside profile, rough out the inside. The big ones I'll always take cores out of with the McNaughton system and make smaller bowls. If it's a 6-inch bowl, I'll get another 4-inch one out of there. So I core them with the McNaughton system, that's what I do. So I don't bother about trying to get nested bowls out of it because I can't sell the smaller ones and they won't buy nests in Britain. So I just take the biggest 4-inch I can get out of the 6-inch bowl, basically. That's what I do. But those pieces, if you take that viewpoint, that those bowls are based on that factor, and in the finish, the roughing out process, the cutting and all the rest of it, and stickering and drying, that takes about 25 minutes of that 40 minutes. So when you pick them back up on the lathe and retrue them back up and make them, it's about 15 minutes that you've got to do those pieces once they've roughed and distilled. If you don't do that, you don't earn a living. It's as simple as that. You've got to become efficient if you're going to work in that world, if you will. And I've done that for many years. But if you then say a 6-inch bowl, that formula that I'm giving you is Richard Raffin's formula. And Richard's pretty darn quick around the lathe, so to speak. But if you go to 6-inch, you multiply that, the dimension by 6 by the dimension, the diameter is 1.5 times, not just by 1. You don't just go 10 by 4 and that's 40 minutes. You go 10 by 6 by 1.5 basically, because you can't do it in that time. It's just the extra depth means it takes longer to do it. Now, I'm making all these comments at the moment about the time made into a domestic utilitarian piece. And these pieces on the side here took longer than any of what I've just said, because they're a totally different animal altogether. They're aimed at the gallery type market. They're in woods which are exotic, which take a lot longer to work because they're much more, they're denser and so forth. There's a different making process when you do those. You don't just go to the lathe and make the shape that comes second nature to you. You stand back from the lathe and analyse the shape a bit. You stop the lathe quite often, come back, take another cut, stand back, take another cut. You don't do that when you're in production, you just go for broke, basically. So there's a different thought process. And I'll just back up and say one other thing. My son, who's 38 years old now, he has never made, well, I think the last bowl he ever made was it was the bowl. The last thing he ever turned was when he was 18. And I always laugh that when he was 14, he was with us in this country. And we stayed at Rudy O'Solnick's, my wife and I. And he was up in Rudy's and he got bored. And Dave Hope was our assistant that time. And Darren comes out to the workshop and says, "Dad, I'm bored, can I make a bowl?" And I says, "Well, no, I've got 10 people in the store." Dave says, "I'll look after him, don't worry, there's plenty of layers here, I'll find you a layer." So he gets there and he says, "Dad," and he's left-handed, and I've always said, you know, I've had people on courses and I get myself into trouble when I ask them if they're right or left-handed, and they say, "Well, I'm left-handed," and I look at them over the glasses and say, "That's unfortunate." I said, "He should have been put down at birth." and then I say, "Well, my son's left-handed, so that's the way I feel." And it's just a joke, but I get myself into trouble. Dale Nish told me one day when he was down in Florida, and this guy said to Dale, "What advice have you got for me?" as I'm left-handed, and Dale says, you'd better learn to turn right-handed. This guy said, that's better than RayKeyDemo, because he said I should have been put down at birth. Anyway, we do these things. But our dear son came out into that workshop at Rudy's, and he made this gorgeous little bowl, the first bowl he'd ever made, and he was left-handed. And he said, I've watched you enough, I know what to do, just tell me what angle I put the toilet. And away he went. And he made this lovely little cherry bowl, about 7 inch diameter, 3 inches deep, and it was a good piece. I wish I'd have made one like that, the first one I ever made. Next day he comes out and he makes another one. Those are the only 2 bowls he's ever made. And we went up into Philadelphia, and he couldn't wait to show Dale this. He runs up to his bedroom, pulls these bowls out and shows Dale, and Dale says, they're pretty good, Darren. And he said, I should put your name on it before your dad sells them. And he's still got them. But those are the only 2 bowls he's ever made. But what he has got is a very good eye for thought, because he's been brought up around ceramics, wood, glass, and all the rest of it. We used to have a craft shop for about 10 or 15 years, when my wife ran. And he was brought up with this, and I'm just making the point that when I have a run of salad bowl production, and I might work on it for about 6 weeks, and then I start to make the gallery type bowls for the individual market, because you've been in a production mode, the way you have to think is different for those individual pieces. And what I find, I can't just drop a production piece and make an individual piece that hits the right note, so to speak. There's something not quite refined enough. And if I've been in this situation, I've got a group of work which are individual pieces set out on a table or something. My dear son will work in, and he said, and he'll look at them and says, like that, don't like that, blah, 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 and he goes through it like this. And inevitably, the ones he picks on are the first ones that I've made after I've been on a production run. And it's a different mindset in the way you have to analyse the shape and form. But he spots it. He can't tell you why. You know, he doesn't know why it isn't as good as that one, but he just doesn't like it. But they're always the ones, the first ones I've made after coming off a production run. And I don't have the ability to make individual and production pieces at the same time, one after the other. It was suggested to me by a gallery, and I did the production bowls in the morning, the individual pieces in the afternoon. That's what work for me. Okay, I better swap my glasses back. So we'll go on, and I'll rough this out. And I like to tell stories, as you were beginning to realise. Now, what I'm just doing here, I'm using the 3/8 ball gown, and this has got the thread from that screw choker. What I normally do, I haven't got it with me, is I bore this away so I get at the thread of the screw choker here with the gouge. And what I normally have is a twist screw. I've got a long twist screw, which is about 16 or 18 inches long. And what I normally do is put a masking tape on there for the depth and then just run it in there. If you do it without relieving this where you've got a screw choke in there, the spiral of the twist screw will hit that thread and whip it out of your hand. It will pick up on the thread and it tears your hand if you don't put a glove on it or something. Sometimes it picks up and you can't withstand it in any case. So I just like to turn